And welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you as we're going to talk some basketball and even more importantly some baseball perhaps coming to the central part of the state. And our good friend Pat Williams will be joining us in a minute. And Don, I'll let you do the introduction since you two guys go back a ways.
Well, we had a chance just to chat briefly before we went on the air. Pat, first of all, officially a welcome again. And another one of your books, but this time a really very, very interesting. Not that the others haven't been interesting, but this is sort of an unusual book for me because a lot of corresponding dates with people that I know and so forth, but you really put your heart and soul into this one. And I don't know Jim Denny too well. Maybe you'd give us a little front on him first before we talk about the book.
Well, Jim is a freelance writer and lives in the L.A. area, and I've been working with him on different writing projects for probably every bit of 25 years. We've done books about various people. You know, we've written books about leadership. I wrote a book with him about my cancer battle. The two most recent books that have just come out, one is called Character Carved in Stone, about an experience I had at West Point.
Yeah, you and I did a real piece on that one.
Yeah, we had you on about last March when that came out. Yeah, it was a great book.
Yeah, we've got a lot of response on that book. That was really outstanding.
And then, Don, the other one that is new is Lead Like Walt, and we looked at Walt Disney through the narrow focus of leadership. And what did he possess as a leader that has allowed his company, now over 50 years since his death, to continue to flourish like they are. And I think that you can trace it right back to the way that Walt Disney was a leader. And so we've had a good time. And an interesting little footnote, the foreword to that book, written by Brooke and Robin Lopez.
Right.
The NBA centers who are with Milwaukee now, who grew up as Disney, fanatics, and nothing has ever changed. They're still the same way, just love all things Disney, and they wrote the foreword for that book. That was fun.
And it's really, and I'll let Doug jump in here, but it's really an intriguing, right from the very beginning. You say at the end of the first chapter, first part leading into the book about, I have a story for you that you're never going to forget. And this really is a story that once you read it, once you go through it, once you see what this gentleman did, you won't forget.
Well, Don, all you have to do is come over this way and go up into Disney property here and see all that is going on and all the continued growth and the millions of people who come every year from all over the world to enjoy what Walt created. It's really, really fascinating when you think about it that way. Walt had these ideas, and he put shoe leather to it, and the dreams became reality, and now they continue to touch millions of people every year. Doug?
Yeah, family used to come down to Florida for vacation quite a bit. I remember before Disney was there, the central of the state, you'd go to see some of the crazy attractions like the Alligator Show or the Weeki Wachee Springs. You know, they were fun, but until Walt came in there and bought up all that land and had, like you said, his dream of really building not only a theme park, but what he envisioned as Epcot didn't quite turn out to be his full vision, but it was something that he was planning to build there. But boy, he dreamt that back, I guess, in the early 1960s, right?
Well, he made that trip in the private plane on November 22nd, 1963. That's when he toured this area in the morning in a private plane. He didn't. There was not much to see. Lots of swampland and marshy bogland and woods and lakes. But Walt's vision was so remarkable that he saw in his mind that day exactly what could develop here. Long before it became reality, Walt saw it and had a picture in his mind about how it was going to unfold. Unfortunately, he died before he could see it. but he did see it, and that's really why it's here.
Interesting too. You go through the dynamics of his Kansas City growing up, his Chicago growing up, his father, which was obviously very, very important to him, and the fact that delivering papers and working and so forth and so on. That he did go to high school, but he never actually completed high school. But he had this vision of drawing things and went into the service and really was not even eligible to go into the service. He was too young. Dressed himself up. Maybe you'd tell that story too before we get into some of the other stories of the book.
Well, Don, that is true. World War I was raging, and he wanted to be part of it. And he was too young, but he somehow or other convinced them to take him. And he was in Europe during the and guess who one of his friends that he made over there in World War I, Ray Kroc.
Wow.
Who went on and founded McDonald's.
How about that?
Wow.
I didn't see that in the book. Was that in there?
Well, it is, but the two of them became friendly, and there were these two young guys. They were teenagers, late teens, and Walt Disney, and there was Ray Kroc. I'll tell you who else was in the middle of that whole scene was a young Harry S. Truman,
Right.
who was really in combat. The others were not, but he was. So there were some very interesting names that took part in that, who went on and had remarkable lives.
Doug?
Name of the book is Lead Like Walt, Discover Walt Disney's Magical Approach to Building Successful Organizations, and Pat Williams is our guest. And Pat, you talk about Walt's 7 key traits for leadership. We'll get into a couple of them if you like, but I just wondered, I would guess Walt Disney was kind of a natural at it, right? I mean, learning on his own. I don't think he ever went to school to be a manager, right? He just kind of picked it up as he kind of built his businesses along the way?
Well, listen, the meat of our book is we take the 7 leadership traits that Walt had developed, and we look at them in depth. And then the real message is anyone in a leadership position can put those 7 leadership practices into use. Anyone can. Mm-hmm. So I think the best way to summarize it is this: 7 things one must do to be a leader, right and true. Have vision that is strong and clear, communicate so they can hear, have people skills based in love, and character that's far above. The competence to solve and teach, and boldness that has fearless reach. A serving heart that stands close by to help, assist, and edify. Now, Don, I must tell you, that I am not a poet, but the longtime NBA player Swen Nader is.
Yeah, you mentioned him in the book and talked about.
And Swen Nader wrote that poem for us. So
yeah,
that's a little footnote. But
well,
what I shared there really is are the 7 principles that every great leader must possess.
No question. Swen Nader's an individual, really a very, very interesting individual all the way through. And it doesn't have anything to do with the book, but for any people that follow the NBA, follow basketball, and followed UCLA, you have an idea who Swen Nader is. But
played for the Nets as well, New York Nets, New Jersey Nets, and also the Spurs, I believe.
Well, Swen had a long career. He played
at
UCLA behind Bill Walt and didn't play much, but once he got into the pros, he turned out to be a wonderful rebounder. Could score, could shoot. He was a talent. But since then, he's got this great knack for poetry. He used to write poems and send them to his coach, John Wooden. And anytime I've had a situation where I needed a poem to kind of hammer home a point, Swen is always there. He's very, very gifted in that regard.
I thought another thing that was really interesting at the outset, in the beginnings of the book, is you talk about your ideas and your thoughts with your co-author about what you were going to write, how close you actually got to the Disney family remaining, the nieces, and so forth, and the fact that they invited you out to sit at the table And I was totally unaware until your book. And I've been in California a lot of times. I didn't know there was a museum out there. I didn't know anything about that.
Well, Don, a few years ago, it was several years back, the Disney family created this Disney Family Museum in the San Francisco area, and it really traces Walt Disney's life from his very early days, up until his death, and there's so much memorabilia and so much material that that Walt had saved or the Disney family has collected, and so it's well worth going to. I was invited to go to the opening. I was very honored.
Right.
And what happened was I went in and did the tour, and it was wonderful. Then they had a dinner, and I went into the dining area. And who do I run into but Diane Disney Miller, who I had not met, but she had been so helpful to me over the phone. And I went up and introduced myself. She looked, a dead ringer for her father. You couldn't miss that she was a Disney.
That's what she said in the book.
And she said, I told her, she said, now, where are you sitting? I said, well, I don't really know. She said, well, you sit here with us. And so I sat with Walt's daughter and the son-in-law, and some of the grandkids were there. And I just felt so welcomed. And several years later, Don, I was so saddened when I read that Diane Disney Miller had a fall, and it took her life. And she was in good health, but she fell somewhere and died. And so I was grieving over that, because she was such a sweetheart, and I just felt so honored that she, in writing my first book, How to Be Like Walt, she put me in touch with all of the grandkids, and I was able to talk to them about Grandpa and Nana, the grandparents. Oh boy. So it was really a great treat.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that at the outset. You wrote a terrific book a few years ago about Walt Disney, but you emphasized in this book that you were so fortunate to get so much more information that you put together in this book than what you had done in the first book.
Yeah, I think that's true, Don. I don't think Walt Disney's life will ever be fully studied, because there's just so much information and so many people that Walt impacted that we probably have never known about.
Right.
And somehow, if you could collect all those stories of all the people that have had some encounter with him, it's all out there, and hopefully somebody will be able to dig all that up someday. We did the best we could in rounding up Disney stories and Disney memories, but I'm sure there are thousands of them that haven't been garnered yet.
Doug?
Basketball Hall of Famer, also co-founder of the NBA's Orlando Magic, Pat Williams, is our guest. Before we get to talk about the Orlando Dreamers and the baseball, Pat, I just want to ask you, what do you think Walt would make of of his company now? Not just the theme park part, but just the media conglomerate it's become. Obviously, he would never have that in his mind because it wasn't invented yet, all the cable TV and all that. But I wonder what he would think of it.
I think he'd be pleased. When you think about Disney theme parks, they're in China, they're in France, Hong Kong. I mean, it's just remarkable, the growth of that company. I don't think Walt would be surprised. I think he probably felt that he had a product that the world was going to be absolutely craving for. And it would be fun to talk to him, wouldn't it? Just to get his take on all this.
Would it ever be fun?
He was such a visionary that he probably wouldn't be all that shocked. One thing I do remember him saying to his son-in-law, late in his life, he knew he was dying, but he said, "Ron, if I could hang on or live for another 10 years, I think he said 20 years. Well, 65. Yeah, another 20 years, he said, we would dwarf everything we've done up to now." Oh, and
his idea of the Dome City and the electric cars going around and no automobiles and all those things that are and space weren't concerned about space travel and all that. He was way ahead in that. But let me ask you one other thing that I sort of got a blend in your book, and that was that it seemed to me that Roy was more conservative, much more conservative. He worried about the dollar, whereas Walt was just the opposite. He was an adventurer, and he gambled. I mean, he gambled on so many different things where he could have gone completely broke. If the Seven Dwarfs hadn't come along or something, he would have been buried.
Don, it's interesting to study great partnerships, in particular in the business world. And Roy Disney was the financial guy. He was, let's call him the inside man. Walt, of course, was the outside man, the visionary, the dreamer.
Right.
Anything could be possible, but somehow it all had to be paid for. And that's where Roy came in. There were moments when Roy and Walt really disagreed, and there were some bitter feelings. Eventually, they got ironed out, and it was always over money. With Walt saying, "We can do this," and Roy said, "Walt, we can't. There's no way to pay for this." And Walt would argue and say, "It's going to work, and it'll pay for itself." Well, they had some disputes, but thankfully, Roy was strong enough to stand up to Walt, and he was also smart enough to know when to leave Walt alone and let him run with his dreams. Listen, somebody could write an incredible book just on the relationship between these two brothers.
Had to be.
Sure.
That would be a fascinating read.
And the other thing I thought was interesting that you pointed out in the book, which I would say not 100%, but I would say 99% would be impossible today. I mean, they thought if he was going to build the Disneyland, he was going to build it right outside of Los Angeles. He sort of kept it quiet until he got out to Anaheim. Then they were going to build before they were going to go to Orlando. That was a last minute thought in his mind, as you said, flying out, looking at the land, dreaming that it could be there. But nobody actually knew what he was doing.
Well, they kept it a secret here.
But how can you do that today?
Oh, you couldn't.
No.
But back in the early 60s, you could. Eventually, the Orlando Sentinel broke the story, but they did not want to, because if it was out there, the price of the land was going to jack up.
Exactly.
And so they kept it very quiet, and while they were doing business behind the scenes.
But even in Anaheim, I mean, it's 30 miles outside of Los Angeles, and of course, the Anaheim, all as they said, as you said, the book was all orange groves at the time. But I mean, they were so confident that he was going to build this thing right by Los Angeles. They never dreamed he was going out to Anaheim.
Well, he realized, Don, that there just was not enough land in the greater LA area back then. There just was no place to have the size that Walt envisioned. So he hired some people who were experts, and they began to scout around, and eventually it all kind of led to Southern California in Anaheim, which as we talked was just fields and orange groves, and there was nothing there.
But they did have the perception of the highway coming in. That was on the drawing board, so they knew it was going out there.
Yes, it was. And that was the thing, by the way, when Walt was touring by air over Central Florida, he saw the highways that were already in place, and that's what really excited him. There was nothing else much to see, but he did see where the highways were constructed, and he thought, boy, that's going to be a huge part of this, getting people in and out. And those highways, by the way, are still here. There have been lots of additions and widenings and so forth, but it's basically the same highway system that Walt saw in 1963.
Doug, you're up.
Pat Williams is our guest. Again, the name of the book is Lead Like Walt. Discover Walt Disney's magical approach to building a successful organization. You mentioned the word Dreamers, Pat, and that, of course, is the name of the baseball team proposal, Orlando Dreamers. Let's spend a couple of minutes on that. I know, Don, you had Pat on another show that you do talking about it a couple of months ago. Any updates on that?
Well, here's what happened. On November 20th, we had a press conference, and we said to the city of Orlando in Central Florida, do you want Major League Baseball here? Should we try and get it? And here, go to the website and let us know. Well, in the last 2.5 months, 12,000 people have gone up there and said, yes, we want this. We think it's a good idea, and we're in. And so we felt that was a good number and that we're going to continue to grow that number, but that was a pretty good expression of interest. So we have been working away hard on it. We've got our nickname, we've got our logo. I mean, we've got everything but a team and a stadium. We have a stadium site, and we've got stadium plans, and we've got drawings. But now we have to wait and see. Major League Baseball wants to expand by 2. We know that, and we also know from what we read that the Rays, who we think should be here eventually, and we've told them that, but they have this idea of playing 2 cities, half the schedule in St. Pete, half the schedule in Montreal, and which nobody in baseball that I've talked to says it's feasible or a good idea, but they
how could the commissioner, let me interrupt for a minute, Pat, how could the commissioner say that he thought that was a viable plan? Oh, dude, I can't imagine him saying that.
I mean, it's just bizarre that that you would do that. Their plan would be to have a 25,000 seat open air ballpark in St. Pete, which they've never been able to get done. And then on the 1st of July, they moved to Montreal, and they played July, August, and September up there in another open ballpark, open air, 25,000 seats. We are saying to them, guys, just move 70 miles east. Just come 70 miles east, and we're working on a magnificent ballpark for you, and you've got a whole slew of fans who want season tickets, and we've got 75 million tourists who came here last year, and 2,000 people a week are moving to Central Florida, and this place is now the 18th largest media market in the country and growing.
And you're never, ever, ever going to get that in St. Petersburg, Tampa. You're not going to have, first of all, the location. You're not going to have the money. They just made a major change now, and from the governor right on down about how much money they're going to make available, not only for Major League Baseball, but for spring training. It's just a different atmosphere today than it was maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, Don, that's where it is, and I think this split 2-city thing is, it's unheard of. The Rays seem to think it's a good idea. So we continue to stay in touch with them and tell them this is where you belong.
Right. Well, this is what they did with Montreal initially, right? When the league took it over, they played half the games out of the country. They played all over the place, and when the league actually owned the team, when they had to move out of Montreal, so I don't think that's a good footing.
You hit it right on the head. Montreal, those years was a nightmare to Major League Baseball.
Terrible.
They ended up owning the franchise.
Yeah.
And it was just a nightmare.
And the other thing is that I think the Players Association is
so
correct.
Why would you want to go back into Montreal?
Well, not only that, but why would you want to? What the players would have to have 3 places to live. They have to have a place in St. Petersburg. They have to have a place in Montreal, and then have to have the home that they live in the wintertime. I mean, you're going to ask a player to have 3 locations to live in?
It's absolutely bizarre. But the Rays, they've got 8 years left on the lease, and they feel that they're going to give themselves 2 years to see if this thing will work, and then explore other options. And we're just staying, doing our job here, and making sure the Rays understand that this is where they will end up and should end up, and we're working on the ballpark designs, and we're continuing to push our fans here to sign up on that website, and let's stay positive and optimistic, and we'll see where it all leads. But these are interesting days. And then, Don, in the middle of all this, we learned this week about this massive restructuring of the baseball playoffs.
Yeah.
And how,
we're just going to ask you about that.
I read it.
Doug and I talked about that before you came on, that we were going to bring that up and see what your before you answer that question. I also want to go back to your book and talk, which I thought you made a great parallel. You talked about Walt and building, Walt Disney, the whole combination of enterprises. But you also sort of made a correlation between you leaving Philadelphia and going to Orlando, which really was not an NBA stronghold. It was nothing. And you did basically the same thing. You started from nothing and built it into what it is today. So, I mean, you have had firsthand experience with doing, not on the scope, obviously, that Walt Disney did, but you have tremendous foresight in getting down to Orlando and building in that community from the ground up.
That was a great experience, Don. It started in June of 1986, and at the same time, our friend Billy Cunningham ended up in Miami trying.
I think we lost Pat, Don.
I thought the thing dropped for a second.
I think he dropped off there, yeah. We'll see if he can call back. But anyway, sounds like Pat doesn't like that proposal either.
We'll see if we give him a call back just to thank him and get a conclusion on this.
Yeah, we'll see if we can do that. Let me see if we can dial him here.
Okay. It's on the line drop.
Hi, you've reached the Williams residence. We're not available right now. Please.
Well, it looks like we lost Pat there. That's his voicemail coming up, Don. But we will try and get Pat on a future day. But at least we had a chance to talk to him about the book. Again, it's called Lead Like Walt, Discover Walt Disney's Magical Approach to Building Successful Organizations. And it looks like he said 12,000. I think the last time you talked to him, Don, a couple of months ago on another show we do in Tampa that you primarily do, about 10,000. So it's growing.
It's growing as it goes along, and give me when we close. I just don't have Pat's number still in front of you, and give it to me when we close out, and I'll give him a call back and thank him and tell him we apologize if the line had dropped out.
No problem, but hopefully that will move forward. Like you said, the lease for the Rays is another. I thought it was less than 8. I thought it was down to about 5 or 6, but he would know better than us. But it's a long way going still for the Rays to get out of that league. I would think right at this point it would be cheaper for the Rays to buy themselves out of that and move on. I mean, why?
Well, the thing is, they're not going to have any. There's no money coming in. The state has already said that, and Tampa and St. Pete don't have any money to put in. Neither government wants to. The mayor of Tampa, they want the team, but they don't want to put any money up. And St. Petersburg doesn't have any money to put up, according to the mayor. And the county won't put up any money, and the state doesn't want to put up any money. So, and the franchise doesn't want to put up any money. So, I don't see how they're ever going to get that resolved in St. Petersburg, Tampa. I think they're going to have to move the team to one place or another, or get somebody to buy it and build something themselves.
Yeah. We'll see how that goes. And, of course, spring training. Pitchers and catchers report throughout most of Florida and Arizona the next couple of days. And already here in Sarasota, Don, the Orioles equipment has arrived. And today, manager Brandon Hyde and the GM Mike Elias of the Baltimore Orioles, of course, they train here in Sarasota for those listening and watching that are not aware of that. So just want to play about a minute or two, Don, and our listeners, Brandon Hyde, talking about his expectations of what is is going to go on in spring training starting in a few days. Here's Brandon Hyde, manager of the Orioles.
It's a great feeling being back here, and weather's beautiful, and looking forward to get started tomorrow. Any spring training, you spend the off season reflecting, preparing, and then when you get down here, you're excited to get going. So, yeah, I think everybody's got some butterflies going into camp. I think it's natural, and yeah, just looking forward to watching guys work out tomorrow. We have a pretty big number right now, and I think that there's, Mike could touch on it, but there's probably a chance maybe that there's other moves happening. But I think that, yeah, the guys that we have, we're just going through our pictures right now and inside and doing some meetings, and the amount of really good arms we have in camp is impressive. And we want those guys that take some valuable experiences they had last year and build off them and rolling into this year. Bailey has just started, so we look at him as a definite starter candidate. Rucker was a starter up until last year when they moved him in the bullpen to see what his stuff looked like out of the pen. But he does have a starter history also. So we're going to stretch out both those guys and give them a long look. I just think that it's another year of a lot of opportunity in camp. I think that there's a lot of jobs to be won. I think we just talking with the players the last couple of days, they're very realistic and understanding that there's great opportunity here still, and they're going to get a long look. Whether we start a guy in AAA or not, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. A lot of these guys I haven't seen that was in the organization. Mostly those guys that were in AA that weren't in camp with us last year haven't seen in person. So, we're excited about the arms that we have coming, and I'm looking forward to watching them pitch.
And it's Brandon Hyde's comments earlier today over at Sarasota. Sorry about that, Don. That was me. We still had Pat's voicemail on there. I had to get it off, but it cut you off. So I hope you heard a little bit of Brandon Hyde anyway.
I did. I got most of it, so you're right. It's spring training right around the corner. A couple of days, they open things up, and they've been over at the practice fields at Twin Rivers, and so they're ready to go, and it should be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to spring training getting underway.
We will get out there next weekend, pick up our press credentials, and opening day is the 23rd. It starts early, as we mentioned, the regular season getting started the end of March this year. So the Orioles open up against the Red Sox down. That'll be interesting to see what goes on there. I know Ron Renicky was named the interim manager today, so that team is still in turmoil. They still don't know what's going to happen as far as any other suspensions. I know Cora's already out of there, but who knows what else will happen between now and then with the Red Sox.
No, nobody really, you're right, nobody really knows, and more and more players are speaking out now, which is very interesting, too, to see how they take that into consideration. I don't know what the commissioner's point may be, and you and I have chatted before when I talked to Pete Rose, and he's making his application to have his lifetime suspension dropped. Maybe not necessarily from a baseball standpoint, from a Hall of Fame standpoint, because here people throw a wrench into a World Series, and so I know he's very anxious to do that. And we talked, and he's going to wait till after the hearings before he does any interviews or anything. But he's looking forward to getting maybe a different verdict this time from the commissioner.
I know you had a chance, for those not aware, Don was out in Vegas a few weeks ago, and, of course, Pete does an autograph signing session. He moved from the place he used to be, Mandalay Bay, to MGM, and Don went over there, and he spent some time with him that afternoon, right? We put a picture of that up on our website there, but it seemed like he was having a good time.
Right, and I talked to him because he gave me the number to call him and to have him on, and I called, and he said they want to stand pat until after things are being heard. They don't want to, they don't want to put another wrench in.
He got in trouble, or another interview I think he did about a year and a half ago. So of saying some stuff, or stuff came out, right? So he doesn't want to do that again.
No, neither does his agent.
That's
his
right.
Lawyer.
So we'll have Pete on hopefully soon after whatever decision they make. And of course, Don knew Pete from the Philadelphia Phillies days. Back in the 80s. So that must have been, was that fun reminiscing with him? I probably haven't seen him in a while, right?
Oh, no, I haven't seen him in, about 20 years, I guess. And no, was great fun reminiscing with him and talking about a number of people from the clubhouse guys right on up to Mike Schmidt, who he used to call Herbie. And he was a great guy for nicknames. He liked to have nicknames for everybody. But no, he was a lot of fun, and I hope they get the thing ironed out, and we'll go from there.
One thing about Pete, I mean, despite all the stories that, things he's done, he's a likable guy. I mean, you hear him in these interviews, you can't not like the guy, unless maybe, you're with him 24 hours a day. But these interviews, he comes across really like a lot of fun.
That's exactly right. He's a fun guy to be around, and talks a lot of baseball. And if you like baseball, he's the guy to talk to because, he keeps such close track of everything. I mean, he and Larry Boa kept track of every trade that was going to be made, it was possibly going to be made, or even thought about being made, and he follows it very, very closely still.
Yeah, he still watches, he says, baseball. After he does his signing, he goes home, he says he watches baseball every night and knows exactly what's going on today. It's not like he's living in the past. I mean, he knows today's players. Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. That he's as intense about watching the game as he was when he was playing, and he wants to follow what every team's doing, and what kind of trades they're making and what's happening, and he's very much into it.
It's really a shame because I remember when I first came to Tampa back in '88, he was actually managing the Reds at that time. Had a chance to cover a couple of those games when they played in downtown Tampa. Down, I don't know if you remember that stadium, a real old wreck of a place where the Reds had their spring training, and he was the manager, and he was there for a couple of years, I guess, before it all hit the fan. But it looked like he was a pretty good manager, or it could have been a great one, right?
I think you're right there, and you're right also on the other point. I was never there. I was never at that stadium. That's one that I missed.
Yeah, you didn't miss much. Downtown Tampa was a real old dump, but it was when it first came down, it was interesting to see. But anyway, that's the story with Pete Rose. We'll get him on as soon as we can. But then thanks again to Pat Williams again for joining us, of course, Hall of Famer. Founder of the Orlando Magic, and now trying to bring baseball to Orlando with the Orlando Dreamers. So, Don, good job on that. Thanks again to Pat. I'm sure he'll have another book out in another couple of weeks. We'll have him on again.
Absolutely.
And we will keep track of going on in spring training. We'll do our reports. We'll see that on our website as well. But thanks for listening and watching. We'll see you again real soon. All right, very good. Hold on a second.
Good job.
Yeah,
let me get a pencil here.
Yeah.
I'll give him a call back.
I'll edit out the audio part where we were waiting for him, and I'll clean that up.
Yeah.
407.
Wait a second. Let me get
okay.
a pencil there. 407.
420.
420.
7587.
7587.
Yeah, it looks like that's his home number from his wife or something came on there. So yeah.
Okay. Well, if I don't
tell
get
him.
him,
I think it must be a cell number or something. Yeah.
I'll just leave it on his voicemail if I don't get him.
Yeah, it crapped out there because you were still coming in fine, but that was on his end or whatever there. So we usually don't have phones drop off.
It started to get real staticky right just before it dropped out. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, because yours didn't drop. It wasn't like the setup here. I can tell if it's on our side, but no, that was
right.
But, no, he was good. Yeah, very good.
Yeah,
so
he's always good.
Yeah.
All right, I'll let you know how I make it. I'll give him a call.
Okay, very good. You going to? You didn't go to the round table today, did you? Oh, he's gone.
Go up into
Last March when that came out. Yeah, it was a great book.
Yeah, we've got a lot of response. A lot of.
And welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you as we're going to talk some basketball and even more importantly some baseball perhaps coming to